Hello and good morning, everyone. Only Positivity here. I have my coffee with me, ready to kick off the 12th podcast on this series that I'm looking to launch called Elevated Thoughts. So, before diving into the book, just want to level set on what I'm doing here. As I endeavor upon pursuing knowledge and life experience in this next phase of life through fitness, photography, traveling, and many other things, one habit that I've really formed is reading. So this podcast essentially goes through some of the books I've been reading as of late, and taking some of those lessons learned and bringing them back to experiences in my life. Before going into today's book, which is I'm really excited to talk about, different than The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, but I think it's time for our story. In the last podcast, the story had to do with me and the guys in Macau, right? We were out there for a bachelor party, and we were just having a good time out there. We were having some fun, drinking, partying a little bit, but nothing too crazy. But on the way back, right? Um, I don't know if you guys remember. So essentially, we had to take a boat from Hong Kong, about an hour, 45 minutes or so. Um, to Macau. So on the way back, it was the opposite, right? So we have to take a boat from Macau to Hong Kong. And now we had been up almost all night, the night before, because it was the last night. We were just like, let's go out with a bang. So we were up all night. In the morning, we're all groggy. We didn't sleep really. We are hungover, and we're on this boat. We're like zombie mode. So anyway, we get to the Hong Kong airport, and we are all exchanging our money from Macau dollars back to US dollars. Just as a side note, so I'm not a big gambler, but when I do go to the casino, and I think I've been to a casino maybe two or three times in my life, I like to play roulette because I'll tell people that I figured out roulette, but I actually don't know how to play that game at all. Neither any of the other games either within a casino. I'm not really good with poker, hold'em. I'm not good with blackjack. I know how to play blackjack, but I'm not really good at any of these games because um, I tend to have like an addictive personality, I guess. So I'm not trying to get addicted to going to casinos and gambling and whatnot because that would be a bad path for me to take. But anyway, so we're exchanging our money, and I was playing roulette the night before until very late, and my methodology when I go into a casino is this. So I usually withdraw like 60 bucks. As soon as I lose it, I'm done for the day. And the reason I go to roulette because it's generally a very low buy-in, like 20, 25 bucks maybe. And I always bet on red or black because I do not understand how the numbers work, nor do I care to figure out the game. So it's like red or black, 50-50. And so I'm riding this wave. I'm, betting on red every time, and I'm just, I'm getting my money back, getting my money back. Before you know it, I've got enough money that paid for my flight there, which is awesome. So long story short, we're at the currency exchange at the Hong Kong airport, and we're all exchanging our money back to U.S. dollars. And one thing, relating it back to Indian culture is, there's a very distinct habit of Indian people. When they see other Indian people, they tend to just kind of stop and stare, or just kind of stare in a prolonged manner. We are at the currency exchange in Hong Kong, and we're getting all our stuff squared away. And there's a banner, a digital banner that's kind of just illustrating all the exchange rates for the different currencies. And we are all there, and we see an Indian auntie walking through the airport by herself. She has one of those luggage carts she's pushing, and she's wearing a sari in the airport. So that distinguishes her as an Indian lady. So anyway, she stops in front of the currency exchange, and she sees five or six brown dudes just at the currency exchange counter, and she just stops, and what it looks like is she's staring at us. And mind you, we're all hungover, all a little tired, potentially a little bit irritable, you know what I mean? So one of my buddies, he says this out loud in a loud way, but doesn't direct it at her, and he says something like this. This is the problem, man. Like, Indian people just don't know how to not stare when they see other Indian people. And then in my mind, I'm like, oh, someone's a little cranky today, so my buddy just, he shoots that one off, right? So he says that really loudly, and then um, we're like, oh shit. And then out of nowhere, this Indian lady goes, actually, I'm just looking at the exchange rates, so don't flatter yourself. and we are all like, "Oh shit!" Like we're like getting bucked because she just roasted our friend really, really badly. It was funny. It was hilarious, and um, this lady was clearly from America. Because she had a clear American accent, and she was very articulate, and she even was laughing about it with us. It was a really funny, lighthearted story because I think even she understood that stigma around, Indian people always staring when they see other Indian people. So, funny story there. Hope you guys enjoyed it. These are type of shenanigans me and the guys get into every now and then. Very lighthearted, but we remember them for years and years just because they're so funny and they take us off guard. So, coming back to elevated thoughts. So today we're going to be going through a new book, right? And so today's book is titled "Man's Search for Meaning" by Viktor Frankl. So, the book is really written in two parts. The first part will go through Viktor Frankl's experience within Auschwitz, the concentration camp, during the Holocaust. And the second part really goes through the human psychology as it's related to traumatic experiences, such as the Holocaust. So, what I really like about this book and the other books that we've been reading throughout this year so far is that it shows really that no matter how um, difficult life can become, or the challenges faced in life, we as humans can really be resilient, but that is all up to us. Um, so let me go ahead and paint the landscape for you that Viktor Frankl enters into during the Holocaust. Okay, so painting the picture of life in a concentration camp. So in terms of their housing, he says there was often 1,500 captives that were housed in a shelter that was probably designed for only 200 people. So that's insane right there. Everyone's cramped up. People are extremely close quarters, and this is a segue into the psyche of how it affects the psyche of someone within a concentration camp. So going forward to their food, one 5-ounce piece of bread would be their food for 4 days, right? And how often do we eat throughout the day? I eat 3 meals throughout the day. I eat three relatively hefty meals throughout the day. I don't know if I could survive on one 5-ounce piece of bread for 4 days. So going forward, they used cigarettes as currency. So many people in concentration camps didn't really smoke, and it wasn't wise to because it was currency. So um, they would often use or trade cigarettes to get more food or another piece of clothing. And one thing that's sad about this whole situation is that he goes into saying that if you saw someone smoking a cigarette in the concentration camp, you knew that they were either going to be executed, like in the gas chamber, or they would be dying soon from something terminal. Because at this point, they've given up all aspiration, all hope, and they've accepted death. They've given up. There's also 2 blankets for every 9 men. So now I sleep in a little burrito, right? I need a huge king size blanket, and I wrap myself up and kind of look like a cannoli when I sleep. So that would definitely not work for me, but 2 blankets for 9 men. So going forward, upon entering the concentration camp, they would have to take off all of their clothes and surrender all of their belongings. They were whipped with leather belts if they didn't move fast enough. And all that was left was their naked bodies. They would even shave them. So, this is very minute and in a granular detail, but think about it at a high level. They were stripped of everything that identified them as themselves, right? Stripped of their clothes. Their heads were shaved. They were bathed, and all they were left with was their naked body. They were given these tattered clothes with holes, patches, things like that. They were given wooden shoes sometimes. Um, so going into some of the things in the preface, okay? So um, thinking about what is a defining characteristic about you that is not your hair, not your clothes, or your stature in society. So when I say, hey, look, only positivity, what identifies me? Is it the fact that, I'm a senior manager? Is it my haircut? Is it my style? What is it about me that defines me? And if it's something that is material or something that doesn't exist if you don't necessarily have it tangibly, then is it something worthwhile? That's just something to think about, right? I'm not saying good or bad, just something to think about. What identifies you as you? So, um, Viktor Frankl starts off the book with saying, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." And that is very, very high level. But I'll say it again. He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. So, the book states that some prisoners really give up on life. They gave up on life. They lost all their hope to live, um, and they also lost their morals and values. Right, in these trying times where you were stripped of everything that you once loved, and now you're in this almost poverty, traumatic environment. Um, are you able to keep your scruples? Are you able to still be resilient during that time? And what I'll say is, because this book takes place in a concentration camp, there's a lot of dramatic examples, and there's a lot of dramatic examples of giving up on life, right? He'll go into people, living in their own excrement. They just given up, I'm gonna die any moment. I'm just gonna, shit myself, piss myself in the bed. Someone will clean me up. I'll be unresponsive about this. And some people even committed suicide, right? They would run to electric wire. If they were able to hang themselves, they would. But that doesn't necessarily apply directly to modern day. So giving up on life, I think, in modern day, isn't always something as drastic as committing suicide. It could be giving up on bettering yourself. It could be giving up on always looking for ways to improve, giving up on your health, giving up on your mental fitness as well. Um, and so, to reaffirm that, Viktor Frankl says this: people died less from lack of food or medicine as opposed to lack of hope. So, I know people who are my age, right? I'm 28 years old. I know people who are my age who are lethargic. They don't really do much. They aren't bad people by any means, but they're just kind of complacent and they're comfortable in life, right? There's nothing distinguishable about them, which is fine. But one thing to really charge yourself on is, do you have a why? Do you have a true why? So for me, one thing I'll say is, like, I've been climbing the corporate ladder in a lot of ways, and I will say that I've realized that that is not my why, right? Because as when I went from an audit associate to an analyst, I was like, oh, I found my why. When I moved from an analyst to a senior analyst, oh, I found my why. Senior analyst to manager, manager, senior manager, right? Like, my why is never there or being attained. So I've had to look for other whys in my life. But going off of that, I know people in their 80s, and because of their youthfulness and their positive attitude, are still thriving, but just in different ways, right? So using an example, my uncle and my aunt, they're by no means in their 80s, right? They're not in their 80s or anything like that. But within the past couple of years, they have actually um, climbed or topped Mount Kilimanjaro, right? They went up in a strenuous 2 to 3 week hike up Mount Kilimanjaro at the age of 55. And this guy has a why, right? My uncle and aunt have a why. They're exploring. They're at Zion, Yosemite, Badlands. They're tackling life, and they're doing it with a positive attitude and a youthful attitude. And I think that carries over directly to one's health. So going back to the book here, another statement that Viktor Frankl dives into: life is not always a search for pleasure. The greatest task for a person is to find meaning in life, right? And I believe that is the greatest accomplishment or the greatest task one can be charged with, is finding meaning in their life, because it's not easy. It's a gray path. There's no structure there for you. You just have to kind of find it, and you have to do it the right way. So essentially, I'm speaking high level here, but everything can really be taken away from you besides how you respond to a situation. So you can lose your house, your family, your friends, but how you respond is the one thing that is always going to be in your control, as Viktor Frankl puts it. So what about right now with COVID going on? How are we all responding to the situation? Are we still pushing forward with our goals of being better, or are we taking this time as an excuse to maybe not do anything? And there, I'm no guru on any of these things, but not much has changed for me personally right now. I'm still able to do my at-home workouts. I'm still able to go outside for my runs. I was just Under Armour up. I've been, stretching extensively a lot more. I've been doing a lot more yoga and meditation, with all this quote unquote extra time that I have now. So I'm able to attribute more time to my podcast. But at the same time, I do take my time to unwind. I've been watching TV a lot more than I normally do as well. So the thing here is to not. It's not that I'm doing more or less now. It's I'm still on track with my goals. I'm still on track with my fitness. I'm still on track with my mental. So I think it's a real attestation in forming habits that are sustainable no matter what environment that you're in. Anyway, I'm no guru, just kind of my opinion, and my way of doing things. So he goes deeper into this, about people who are finding their why, and I think it hits home what I was saying earlier. He says, I know businessmen who, upon retirement, lost all zest for life. So, this takes me back to an example, when I worked at Deloitte many years ago. So there was a partner I knew, and a partner is like the highest member in the firm, not the CEO or the C-suite, but they are those who have been in the firm for a long time. They're higher than account execs. They're just some of the most valuable folks in the firm. So, I had a mentor who was a partner during my time at not Northwestern, sorry, at Deloitte. And his biggest worry was what he was going to do, at age 62, because at age 62, when I was there, Deloitte makes their partners retire. They force them to retire. And he was stressed out about that because he was approaching that age. So, I keep in touch with this partner, not actively, but from time to time we still touch base. Um, and day after day, he had sounded depressed, when I would connect with him. And this is interesting to me, right? Because, um, you know, some people are able to, dive into new things. They're constantly looking for a new challenge, whether it be at work, outside of work, mentally, physically. But other people just don't know what to do. And I think it's a real exercise in finding an appropriate why and purpose in your life, right? My purpose was never to be a partner, or I don't want to attribute my purpose to, a title, because I know now that is never going to bring me personally fulfillment. It could bring people fulfillment, right? Not saying that it's a bad cause, but it personally doesn't bring me fulfillment. So, um, like I said, some people do rise to the challenge, and I can use my father as an example of that, right? So he's retired recently, and he's been really cleaning the house a lot. That's one of his main things to do. He's been meditating, reading, participating in yoga challenges. Him and I connect on those things now because I'm doing the same things. So, in many ways, his emotional intelligence and his life in general is better than it has ever been, right? He's chosen to elevate his life in different ways. He's no longer worried about survival, his children, he's worried about self realization and fulfillment. So, going forward, let's bring it back to the book though. So, Viktor Frankl says every man in the concentration camp was controlled by the thought of keeping himself alive for the family waiting for him at home. So this is a why that many people, including Viktor Frankl, rationalize. I want to stay alive. My purpose is to get back to my family because I love them very much. So he goes forward and talks about how capos were selected, right? And capos are, um, in between the officers at the concentration camp and the prisoners. They're kind of the people that will report to the officers about the dynamics in the camp. And the capos were prisoners, right? They were just prisoners that were selected, who were more ruthless, who were more vicious. So he says the process of selecting capos was a negative one. Only the most brutal of prisoners were chosen for this job. So these are the people who would rat on fellow prisoners, beat fellow prisoners, and essentially report them to the officers. So this is another example, right? Going deeper into it, you would see year after year people would lose their scruples, right? In that fight for existence in the concentration camp. They were prepared to use any means and even brutal force to survive, and they would betray and steal just to survive. Okay, so you see people's values dwindling during this traumatic time. But he goes forward and says, but does a man who makes his observations while he himself is a prisoner, possess the necessary detachment. So, Viktor Frankl is attempting to work through all this trauma and write a thesis and things like that on it. But he's asking himself, am I detached enough from the experience within the concentration camp to really be able to speak to this properly or in an objective way? And I think that's a great exercise, right? No matter what, situation we are in life, we should generally always try to be objective on our situations, right? We shouldn't really be trying to come from a subjective standpoint. And should be able to get a high level view of what life looks like. Anyway, moving on. So, um, Viktor Frankl is looking to form like a methodical presentation, right? He needs to be able to go to facts and figures. Um, and it was tough for him, right? Because it's tough for us in our everyday lives to come out objectively, but at the same time, going through the concentration camp as traumatically as he went through, how can he even be subjective, right? So, going forward, he talks about suicide, okay? So, a lot of people would commit suicide. And that was one of their main ways of doing this was to one of their main ways of doing this was to run into an electric fence, okay? So, um, this electric fence would really prevent the prisoners from escaping, but Viktor Frankl made a pact with himself on day one that he would not go out that way, right? He said, I'm either gonna die here by fighting to survive, or I'm gonna make it out. So he ruled out suicide from day one. So he goes forward and starts talking about the stages of shock that a prisoner would go through. So the first stage of shock would be not fearing death, and they were not afraid of death because they could honestly end their lives at any point, right? They could all run into the wire and electrocute themselves and die. So they began, not being afraid of death. The second phase, though, is a little bit more, I don't want to say interesting, but it is, right? It's a little bit more interesting, a little bit more deep. And he calls it relative apathy. So he classifies it as an emotional death. So, at first, when prisoners would enter the camp, they would get whipped, right? Like I said before, they'd be stripped of all their things and be whipped. And at first, there'd be like a ghastly reaction to that, and people would seem really disgusted and uneasy by someone getting whipped right in front of them. But after a while, prisoners would not even bat an eye as a capo or a captain would, beat the shit out of a prisoner. It was just part of normal life now, right? And that was a defense mechanism. It's not that they really didn't care, but imagine if you weren't blunted by the horrors of a concentration camp. You would be distraught, right? Um, you would have to numb yourself in some way, or you would go into a deep depression. And like I said, this is a really really deep example and really like extreme example of life in a concentration camp. But let's talk about it today, right? Let's talk about a difficult relationship or a toxic relationship with our friends, family, work, anyone. We can often become blunted by things as a defense mechanism, right? Let's say my significant other was always lying to me, right? But somehow I didn't leave. I was just blunted by that. I just kind of I swept it under the rug. I didn't acknowledge it. I didn't work through it. I didn't see the sign. Or let's say I have an abusive parent who's constantly berating me, insulting me, yelling at me. I would think that's the norm, right? I would think that in a defense mechanism, I would think, hey, this is how all parents behave. This is how life is, right? But as you step out of those things, you realize that's not the case. But in the moment, the only way to really protect yourself is through numbing yourself. So going forward in the concentration camp, after someone died, which was a little gruesome, you would see a lot of the other prisoners rush over and grab a shoe, grab clothes, raid the pockets of this dead person. And then Viktor Frankl really goes into saying, it was sad, right? But it was not emotional. They weren't stealing like from a dead person per se. They were taking essential items that this person no longer needed, and they needed to remain alive, right? They could use the extra clothing as a blanket. They could even have shoes if they didn't have shoes to begin with. So the prisoners were really forced into this like primitive state where all they were really focused on was, eating and staying alive. And Viktor Frankl goes deeper and says, the most painful part of the beatings wasn't the physical component, it was the insult that it applied. So this goes beyond anything physical or even material. So moving on, right? Let's talk about how the prisoners slept, right? What did the prisoners dream about? And Viktor Frankl states, right, that they would dream about cakes, warm baths, even cigarettes. These are basic necessities, right? Like think about it. Like I don't dream about taking a hot shower, or I don't really dream about eating breakfast because those are things that happen, right? They're going to happen no matter what. I might dream about, retiring early potentially one day, or traveling to a foreign land, potentially living somewhere I haven't lived normally, that wanderlust type dream. But um, these people were dreaming about basic necessities. But anyway, going forward to the morning, the the one of the most ghastly moments was waking up in the morning, because it would often be dark. It'd be like a nocturnal hour, like 4:35 a.m., and there would be this shrill um, whistle in the distance. It would go off for minutes and minutes, and you know these whistles would awake them from their basic dreams, right? From these dreams of taking a nice hot bath, taking a warm shower, eating, smoking a cigarette, and they would have to go back to that harsh reality of the concentration camp. Going forward to their food, they were definitely undernourished, so there was no sex drive whatsoever. And obviously, right? So at baseline, they're not sexually intimate, and guys are separated from girls, but essentially they don't have the energy to be sexually active regardless, right? Regardless of their sexual orientation. And this is an interesting one, right? Because it does have a deeper meaning beyond just sex. Okay, so the lack of ability or want to be intimate, whatever form that may be in, right? Like, for example, look at me. If I couldn't be intimate with my fiance emotionally, physically, or even intimate with my friends, like have deep conversations, bond with them. One of my life goals is to create this intimate bond with the people that I love, right? In all facets. Um, but there was no desire to do that, and that's very sad. There's no desire to be close. There's no desire to have camaraderie or anything like that between people. But one thing people did do, which is positive, is they would go through these spiritual experiences during this time. So, they were rid of everything that society had really bound them to, and they were able to focus on survival with the little that they had. So there was really nothing externally that would they could derive happiness from in the concentration camp. So they would direct that internally and have this spiritual experience. So going back to the goal of life, right? Viktor Frankl starts to reminisce on this through his words. He's not attributing his life, right? He was a doctor, he was a psychologist. He's not attributing success or purpose to publishing his work or having a nice car or anything material. And this is important. He says, love is the ultimate goal. Salvation is through love and by being in love. So the goal is not form fitting. It doesn't have tangibility to it. It's an overarching goal that has no type of tangibility. Um, so anyway, going forward, he was able to really get through his time at the concentration camp by remembering his wife and the bliss that she brought him. So this is essentially what he was able to rationalize that I believe ultimately helped him survive through his time at Auschwitz. But he was separated from his wife and he didn't care. It was just a mere thought of having her that was enough to really keep him alive throughout that time. The thought of being reunited with her at some point was enough to keep him alive. So, I'd say love is a really good goal because it's something that's ever changing and it's always evolving, okay? So, I'm no expert in love, but I will say, as time goes on, I feel like I learned to love better. And that's just not with my fiance. It's with all the people I love, right? I learn how to be a better form of me, how to lead by example, how to think about them unconsciously with what I do. You know, um, check on them, ask how things are going, really be a resource that they can come to when they are in need, or even if they're not, right? Promote positivity in my friendships and really figuring out new ways to not only enhance myself, but my surroundings as well. So, um, someone I can really develop a genuine relationship with and explore life with and all its wonders together is what I'm looking for, right? I'm looking to do it with my friends, my family, my fiance, and essentially, this is what keeps Viktor Frankl going. So, wrapping up the podcast today, um, I would just really, really implore everyone to love hard, love at their best, but at the same time, think about a why, think about a purpose, and what your goals in life are, and how you hope to attain them through various modes, right? Through fitness, reading, traveling, things like that. Always have hierarchy goals in mind, and then the structure will shortly follow. But that's all I got for you guys today. I hope you guys enjoyed. Feel free to leave me any comments. And remember, only positivity. Thanks, guys.